In a major setback for Donald Trump, the US Supreme Court has ruled that the president cannot impose sweeping global tariffs with a stroke of a pen. Breaking developments on your screens. In a 6-3 verdict, the court struck down Donald Trump's tariffs that formed the centerpiece of Trump's economic and foreign policy strategy. Chief Justice John Roberts, he wrote that the president had claimed extraordinary power, quote unquote, to unilaterally impose tariffs of unlimited scope, but failed to show clear authorization from the Congress party. Now, why does the ruling matter? The decision is the first major judicial pushback against Donald Trump's expansive view of presidential power on trade. An uphill battle for the president in the Congress as well. Donald Trump had counted on the tariffs to raise over $2 trillion for the federal budget over the next decade and to push manufacturing back to the United States. The administration had warned the court that striking down the tariffs could cause catastrophic consequences for the national security, for United States foreign policy, and for the country's economy. Now, just to look at what are Donald Trump's options, shall we? Despite the setback, the White House has signaled the tariff fight is far from finished. Officials say alternative legal routes are already being explored to preserve as many duties as possible. Businesses, meanwhile, are watching closely, needless to say, especially after thousands of companies filed claims seeking refunds on the tariffs that have already been paid, especially the small businesses. They want the refunds to come in thick and fast. Tariffs are import taxes paid by companies bringing goods into the United States, and the ruling could have major cost implications across various sectors. Even before the verdict, Donald Trump had hinted at a fallback option. After Supreme Court arguments in November, he said the administration would prepare a game 2, a plan B, if the ruling went against him. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirmed officials are examining alternate legal justifications, and these include, let's name a few: national security tariff provision. On the other hand, you've got the retaliatory tariffs against unfair trade practices, fresh determinations by the Office of the United States Trade Representative. But the big questions certainly continue to linger. The big questions: has the court clipped Donald Trump's tariff weapon? Or is a new trade battle about to begin as Donald Trump readies his plan B? Ambassador Jayan Dasgupta, former ambassador to the WTO, with us on the broadcast. Many thanks for taking out the time. Ambassador, how do you look at this crucial development, breaking development? Small businesses and big businesses alike glued to their television screens, trying to make sense of what the SCOTUS has said, the Supreme Court of the United States of America. Donald Trump, on the other hand, spoke to some gathered journalists around him. He said, it's a disgrace, and needless to say, I have plan B. What must be going on in the mind of Scott Bessent? What must be going on in the Trump administration right now? And how significant is this ruling in the first place, sir?
This is extremely significant, especially from the point of view of India, because the interim trade agreement, which India had more or less agreed to accept at 18% reciprocal tariffs, while agreeing to bring down its own tariffs to near zero for a host of industrial products as well as agricultural products which had not been exempted. I think this would be a huge relief, because that 18% itself is open to serious doubt. Despite President Trump's plan B. Now, what is plan B? There are 2 or 3 provisions which have been mentioned in this context. One is the Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, which has already been applied on steel, aluminum, auto, and auto component tariffs. Now, that is something which can only be invoked after an inquiry and, of course, to be carried out by US government officials. But it can only be invoked if there is a national interest involved, security interest. For instance, steel, aluminum, etc., are used in aircraft, jet aircraft, for fighter aircraft, tanks, all kinds of armaments, etc. Now, to impose the same kind of conditions on clothing, on gems and jewelry, on marine exports, etc., would be very far-fetched. And even if President Trump goes ahead and does it, it will also get struck down in the course of time. So that is one option. The
All
second
right.
option is 301, which the US has used in the past also, about an
That's right.
unfair trade practice. Now, that also is not all that easy to impose, and it cannot be done across the board. So this 18% tariff on India is gone as of now, and a host of other nations which had buckled down to the bullying. The European Union at 15%, the UK at 10%, Japan at 15%, Korea at 15%. They all will breathe a sigh of relief. Canada, Mexico, the close allies of the US in a few years ago, they all will be greatly relieved.
Yeah, Ambassador, I was going to ask you how must the European Union and other significant economies be watching this development? And why I ask you that is because I don't want to take names here, but a German economist on Reuters has come on record and said little is likely to change. On the other hand, people are already hoping and wishing for a refund. So how messy is this refund going to be? And why does the German economist say that little is likely to change?
As far as the refund is concerned, it is being estimated to be between $175 billion to
Yep.
about $200 billion. Now, the US Supreme Court has refrained from giving very detailed directions about the refund as to how it will get done. And the Court of International Trade has already got about 2,000 petitions asking for a refund. Now, the Court of International Trade will have to take the issue forward and give directions to the administration as to how the refunds are to be effected. So it is going to be messy. It is not very clear, and those businessmen who have not filed for relief, they may uh, they may still get a refund, but their process may be lengthier as compared to those who have filed a petition. That is the preliminary reading of the situation by lawyers.
Coming back to that preliminary understanding, and for the layman out there, not well versed with the tariff tirade that Donald Trump has thrown around ever since January 20 last year, he looked visibly frustrated. He's called the ruling a disgrace. But then what happens to these tariffs? Are they in abeyance? Are they on pause at the moment? Or do they continue to go on?
As far as the tariffs, reciprocal tariffs are concerned, the Supreme Court has ruled against them. So it would be a proper case for the U.S. administration to issue an executive order withdrawing the tariffs in view of the U.S. Supreme Court verdict. If it doesn't do so, and if it allows it to drift, then there would be petitions asking for specific relief. And of course, similar to our contempt petitions for having disregarded a Supreme Court ruling. So the US administration would open itself up to all these actions. But it is presumed that the US will tomorrow or today itself issue an executive order withdrawing all these tariffs. And it could, of course, at the same time, invoke some other legal provision to apply some
Yep.
of the tariffs on a few products.
How big of a challenge, what kind of an uphill battle will this be for the US president when he's trying to convince the Congress also about the same? And your opinion and insights on as to how the dragon is viewing all of this. Xi Jinping's probably smiling year to year at the moment.
It's true that all the countries which have been affected badly, and that includes everybody, including its closest neighbors, Canada and Mexico, which had aligned their whole trade policies, 75 to 80% of their trade is with the US. Now, they would breathe a huge sigh of relief. Whether it is going to be lasting or not, as you were quoting the German economist, that remains to be seen. But my estimation is that even if President Trump imposes the tariffs It can't be across the board as he had done for all the countries. And two, he had been threatening countries, that, for instance, India has also been threatened implicitly that if it continues to buy Russian oil, then that 25% of punitive tariff will come back again. He has threatened the Koreans because it is taking too long a time for them to get their act together and sign. So another 25% or something. So all these things, I think, they will, have to be checked
All right.
by President Trump himself. But as far as the tariffs go, whether he will reimpose tariffs from tomorrow or something, some of the tariffs at least, that remains to be seen.
Well, the
But
entire
that would also be
administration, yeah.
subject to, yeah, that would also be subject to challenge.
Okay. The Trump administration, I think, is running from pillar to post, especially Scott Bessent and team, just to make sure what kind of tariffs and duties can legally be upheld at this point in time. But only time will tell. Breaking development this late at night, and Ambassador Jayan Das Gupta with us, helping us break this down. Many thanks, Ambassador, for speaking to News9 and putting the story into perspective. Just a short while ago, we spoke to the former ambassador to the United States, former Indian ambassador rather to the United States, Ambassador Meera Shankar. Listen in to what options the Donald Trump has and how did she view this breaking development where the Supreme Court struck down on the Trump tariff tirade. Ambassador, what are Donald Trump's options at the moment? The Supreme Court has struck down on those tariffs. You have Secretary Scott Bessent, other administrative officials that are saying that they will invoke other legal justifications to retain as many Trump tariffs as possible. And if not, will these tariffs now cease to exist?
Well, there are two things which could happen. One is that the U.S. imposes similar tariffs under Section 301 for unfair trade practices by other countries. As I said, there has to be an investigation under that. Secondly, it can impose it on national security grounds under 232. So there are instruments which the US has under which it can impose tariffs on its trade partners, but they will not be so broad-based. They will be more limited. Or Trump can go to the Congress and say, you pass the legislation to impose these tariffs, because tariff imposition and financial powers are actually with the Congress, not with the president. So if the Congress passes
Yeah,
legislation, then the
yes.
tariffs become legal. So he has a range of options. How much he will bring them into play and in what manner, I think we have to wait and see.